Mark, a struggling barista working long hours to make ends meet, often saw the same faces at the cafe. One cold morning, he noticed a man shivering outside the door, clearly homeless. Feeling a sense of empathy, Mark quietly offered the man a warm cup of coffee, never expecting anything in return. Little did he know, this small act of kindness would set off a chain of events that would change his life forever. Just a few hours later, a group of men in suits entered the cafe, their presence marking the beginning of an unexpected twist in Mark's journey. Hi everyone, welcome to Mythos Weaver. Today, I'm excited to share a new story with you. Mark had worked at the small corner cafe for almost 2 years now. The days seemed to blend into one another, each shift the same as the last. The usual customers came in, ordered their coffees, and rushed out the door without so much as a glance. He often wondered if anyone noticed the tired eyes behind the counter or the person who made their daily coffee. But on this cold morning, something caught Mark's attention. As he steamed milk for a latte, he glanced up at the window. There, huddled in a worn jacket, was a man who looked like he hadn't slept indoors in days. His face was pale, his hands trembling as he tried to warm himself in the cold. Mark knew that feeling, the cold, the exhaustion. Though he had never been homeless, he understood struggles. He hesitated for a moment. The cafe policy was strict about giving away free items, but something inside him pushed him forward. Mark made a cup of hot coffee, walked over to the man outside, and handed it to him without a word. The man looked up, his eyes filled with surprise and gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice rough from the cold. Mark nodded, offering a small smile before heading back inside. It was just a cup of coffee, he thought. A small gesture, but it felt like the right thing to do. Beside the warmth of the cafe, life went on as usual. Customers came and went, but Mark's mind kept drifting back to the man outside. He wondered if the coffee had helped, if the man would find shelter for the night. He didn't dwell on it for long, though. There was always another order to fill. Hours passed. The morning rush slowed to a trickle, and the quiet hum of the cafe filled the air. It felt like any other day, at least until the door swung open. The bell above the cafe door chimed, and Mark looked up from the counter. A group of men dressed sharply in dark suits walked in, their presence immediately drawing attention. They seemed out of place in the small, cozy cafe. The usual crowd was a mix of students, locals, and regulars, but these men had an air of importance about them. Mark's heart skipped a beat. He quickly wiped his hands on his apron, trying to appear calm. He wasn't sure what to expect. Were they here for a meeting? Or maybe they had the wrong place. One of the men, tall with silver hair and sharp eyes, approached the counter. "You're Mark, right?" he asked, his voice steady but carrying an undertone of curiosity. Or maybe something more. Mark nodded slowly. "Yes, I'm Mark. Can I help you?" The man smiled slightly, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "We'd like to speak with you about something important. It won't take long. Do you have a moment?" Mark glanced around the cafe. It was quieter now, only a few customers lingering with their drinks. He didn't have much of a choice. "Sure. What's this about?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The man gestured to a table near the back. "Let's talk over there. It's a private matter." Mark hesitated for a second, then followed them. His mind raced with possibilities. What could they possibly want with him? He wasn't anyone special, just a barista trying to get by. They sat down at the table, the men in suits surrounding him, making him feel small in comparison. The leader, the man with silver hair, leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense. "Earlier today, you gave a coffee to someone outside, didn't you?" "A homeless man," he said. Mark blinked in surprise. "Yes, I did. Why? Did something happen?" he asked, feeling a knot form in his stomach. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he studied Mark for a moment. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke again. "That man, the one you helped, He's connected to someone very important. More than you know. Mark's brow furrowed. He didn't understand. I just gave him a cup of coffee, that's all, he said quietly. The man nodded. Yes, but sometimes a small act can lead to much bigger things. You'll understand soon enough. Mark sat there, confused and uneasy. What could they possibly be talking about? Why would a simple gesture like offering coffee to a homeless man draw this kind of attention? Before Mark could ask any more questions, the man rose from his seat. We'll be in touch soon, he said, placing a business card on the table. Then, just as quickly as they arrived, the men in suits left the cafe. The door clicked shut behind them, and the silence in the room seemed even louder than before. Mark stared at the card in his hand, his fingers trembling slightly. The name on it was unfamiliar, but the company logo was something he recognized. It belonged to a major corporation, one that had nothing to do with cafes or homeless shelters. What was going on? And what could this possibly mean for him? The unease gnawed at him as he tucked the business card into his apron pocket. The men had left as abruptly as they had arrived, yet their presence lingered in his mind. What could they want from him? The remainder of his shift passed by in a blur. He served coffee, cleaned the tables, greeted customers, but his mind kept returning to the strange encounter. The homeless man, the odd connection they had hinted at. He sensed there was much more to this story, but he had no idea what. Finally, his shift ended, and Mark stepped outside into the crisp evening air. He glanced down the street, half expecting to see the men in suits lurking in the shadows. But the street was quiet, just like any other night. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the business card once again. The logo on it was unmistakable. It was from a company he had heard of, but it wasn't the kind of company that would have anything to do with a barista from a small cafe. They dealt with high-stakes investments, mergers, and big deals. What could they possibly want with him? Mark's curiosity overtook him. He decided that when he got home, he'd look the company up online. Maybe there would be something, anything, that could shed light on this strange encounter. That night, sitting at his kitchen table, Mark opened his laptop. His fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before he typed the company's name from the card into the search bar. The search results came up quickly. Articles about the company's success, its powerful CEO, and the major deals they had closed over the years. But one article caught his attention. It was about a large charity initiative the company had launched a few years ago. The program aimed to help those who had fallen on hard times, homeless individuals, those who had lost everything and were trying to rebuild their lives. At the heart of this initiative was the company's CEO, a man who had once been homeless himself. Mark stared at the screen, his heart racing. Could it be? Was the homeless man he had given coffee to somehow connected to this powerful figure? If so, why would he return? What could he want from Mark? The next day, Mark went to work as usual, but he couldn't stop thinking about what he had learned. He kept glancing at the door, half expecting the men in suits to come walking in. But the day passed without incident. It was just another normal shift, or so it seemed. As Mark cleaned up at the end of the day, the door opened once again. His breath caught in his throat when he saw who it was. It was the same man from the previous day, the one who had led the group of men in suits. This time, he walked up to the counter alone. "We need to talk," the man said, his voice steady but carrying a weight that made Mark's stomach tighten. Mark nodded. "Okay, what is this about?" "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The man placed a small envelope on the counter. "This is for you," he said. "It's a token of our thanks for what you did yesterday." He paused for a moment before continuing. "The man you helped, he's someone very important to us. More important than you could ever imagine. And we don't forget acts of kindness like yours." Mark looked down at the envelope, confused. It was just a cup of coffee. Anyone would have done it, he thought. Not everyone would have. The man shook his head. "That's why you're different." With that, the man turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving Mark standing there, staring at the envelope. Mark stood frozen, the small envelope still sitting on the counter. He hesitated, unsure whether to open it immediately. The man's words echoed in his mind. We don't forget acts of kindness like that. Taking a deep breath, Mark picked up the envelope. Mark felt the weight of the envelope more than he expected for something so small. His hands trembled as he carefully tore it open, pulling out a neatly folded piece of paper. His eyes widened as he read the words written inside. The letter was formal but brief, expressing deep gratitude for what he had done. But what caught Mark's attention wasn't the words. It was the check tucked inside the paper. Mark's heart skipped a beat as he unfolded it. The amount written in bold numbers was more than he had ever seen in his life. Enough to pay off all his debts and more. For a moment, he couldn't believe it. Was this real? Why would they do something like this? He had only given the man a cup of coffee. Surely, this had to be some kind of mistake. Mark sank into a chair, the check still in his hand. His thoughts raced. Who was that homeless man? Why would such a simple gesture lead to something so huge? It didn't make sense. The next morning, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. He stared at the check again, still unsure if he should cash it, but his curiosity got the better of him. He decided to contact the number printed on the business card the men had left behind. Later that day, Mark dialed the number. His heart pounded as the phone rang. A professional voice answered. Good afternoon, you've reached the office of Mr. Harris. How can we assist you? Mark cleared his throat, trying to sound calm. Yes. My name is Mark. I was told to call this number regarding an envelope I received. There was a brief pause. Then the voice responded, Mr. Harris has been expecting your call. Please hold for a moment. Mark's pulse quickened. A few seconds later, a familiar voice came on the line. It was the same man who had come into the cafe. Mark, I'm glad you called. We hoped you would. Mark swallowed hard. Look, I'm really grateful for the gesture, but I don't understand. Why? Why would you give me something like this? It was just a cup of coffee. The man on the other end chuckled softly. It's never just a cup of coffee, Mark. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest ripples. The man you helped, he's someone very close to Mr. Harris. In fact, he is Mr. Harris. Mark's breath caught. The homeless man? He's the CEO. Yes, the man replied, his voice steady. Mr. Harris has a habit of going unnoticed, blending in with the crowds. He likes to see how people react when they think no one's watching. Most people ignore him, but not you. You didn't hesitate to show kindness, and that's why we're offering you an opportunity. Mark's mind was spinning. An opportunity? What kind of opportunity? There was a pause. Then the man spoke again, his tone serious. Mr. Harris wants to meet with you. He believes someone like you, with your heart, could do more than just make coffee. He's offering you a position within his company, something that could change your life. Mark sat in stunned silence. Was this really happening? Could a simple act of kindness have led to something like this? We'll be in touch to arrange the details. The man continued. But for now, consider this a gesture of our gratitude for seeing the humanity in someone that others might overlook. Before Mark could respond, the line went dead. He sat there for a long moment, staring at the phone in his hand. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Gratitude, disbelief, hope. The following days passed in a blur for Mark. His life, which had once been filled with routine and monotony, now felt like it was on the verge of something much bigger. He couldn't stop thinking about what had happened, the envelope, the conversation on the phone, and the fact that the homeless man he had given coffee to was the CEO of a major corporation. True to their word, the men in suits reached out to Mark again. This time, they arranged for him to meet with Mr. Harris himself. It felt surreal, sitting in the lobby of a towering office building, waiting to meet a man who had lived on the streets just days before. When Mark was finally led into the office, he found himself face to face with the same man he had given coffee to. Mr. Harris sat behind a large desk, but there was no arrogance in his demeanor. Instead, he smiled warmly, his eyes filled with the same gratitude Mark had seen outside the cafe that day. Mark, I'm glad you're here, Mr. Harris said softly, gesturing for him to sit down. I've been looking forward to this conversation. Mark took a seat, still feeling a bit out of place. I, I don't really know what to say. It's all been so overwhelming, he admitted. I didn't do anything special. Just gave you a cup of coffee. Mr. Harris leaned forward slightly, his expression serious but kind. You did more than that. You saw me when no one else did. You didn't judge. You didn't turn away. You showed kindness in a world where it's often forgotten. Mark listened, feeling a lump form in his throat. He had never thought of it that way. It had just been a small gesture, but hearing it from Mr. Harris made him realize how much it had meant. I believe in giving back, Mr. Harris continued, in lifting up those who show the kind of heart you did. That's why I want to offer you something more. A position in my company. You'll start from the ground up, but you'll have opportunities, real opportunities to grow, to build something for yourself. Mark blinked, still trying to process everything. But why me? There are so many people more qualified. I'm just a barista, he said quietly. Mr. Harris smiled again. That's exactly why, Mark. You're grounded, humble, and you see people for who they are, not what they have. That's the kind of person I want in my company, someone who understands the value of kindness. For a long moment, Mark sat in silence, trying to wrap his mind around the offer. It was more than just a job. It was a chance to change his life, to finally break free from the cycle of just getting by. I don't know what to say. Mark finally managed, his voice shaky. You don't have to say anything right now, Mr. Harris said gently. Take your time. Think it over. Whatever you decide, know that your kindness has already made a difference, not just to me, but to everyone who will hear this story. Mark left the office that day with a sense of hope he hadn't felt in years. The weight of his daily struggles seemed lighter, and for the first time in a long time, he could see a future filled with possibilities. A few weeks later, Mark officially accepted the offer. He began his new journey working at Mr. Harris' company, starting from the ground up, just as promised. It wasn't easy at first. The learning curve was steep, and the hours were long. But every day, Mark reminded himself of where he had come from and how a single cup of coffee had changed everything. As the years passed, Mark rose through the ranks. His kindness and empathy continued to set him apart. And though his life had transformed in ways he never imagined, he never forgot the lesson he had learned that cold morning outside the cafe. Sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest ripples. Love this story. Tap that like button and subscribe to Mythos Weaver for more. Let us know how this story made you feel with a single word in the comments. Asterisk.